I was in the hall in '04, and of course, Barack Obama, there was buzz in Democratic circles, but not every delegate knew necessarily what course he would be on. Not every person in that hall until he took the stage. And he gave a speech that I think more so than certainly most speeches outside of maybe inaugurals that us nerds focus on, a speech that is remembered not only for its energy, which it had, but for its substance. That he drew on his tradition, his family background, a story of diversity, a story, by the way, also of migration and America's tradition in its best sense of welcoming immigrants who then become, of course, full American families that go on to lead our country, not putting that in some asterisk or side capsule. And he drew on all that while also being inclusive in ways that you and I and others were discussing last night, that the Harris campaign has set that tone. And he did that, those lines that people remember, that we worship an awesome God in the blue states, that we don't like federal intrusions in our libraries in the red states, and so forth. I don't think it's an overestimation, Joy, to tell you that it took off, it lit up the room, but also mattered in ways that years later people, if they're not quoting the exact lines, they remember the substance, the spirit of that speech. So that's what I remember. I'm curious what you're seeing already today from your reporting as we go into this big night that does turn the page from Biden, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to comment on that, because that was the time when I had gotten out of the news business and was in the campaign world working for, and as a matter of fact, I had taken the Wellstone Action Network training that Governor Walz took too when he decided to run for office after being a high school teacher. And, you know, I just remember '04 being the smartest decision that John Kerry ever made, and in a sense the worst decision, because he was so overshadowed in 2004 by this man who seemed to come out of nowhere for a lot of people. And that was the speech after which Oprah Winfrey declared Barack Obama to be the one. Remember that? He was the one. And I think people started anticipating that he would eventually run for president. And whatever doubts people had that that black man who was named Barack Hussein Obama could be president, I think they were erased in that night. I am also looking to this speech because we all understand and have come to understand that Barack Obama is one of the great orators of our time. He truly is one of the most gifted speech makers in the Democratic Party, but also in the country. And it was his gift, his ability to explain America to itself, to look at America both in the mirror and also to look at it through the window, right? So that he can see America in himself, but he can also see us, in a sense, the way the world sees us, because he has a background that has placed him in the world outside of his country. And so he sees us in a way that sometimes we don't even recognize, and he's able to articulate that in such a profound way that I always look forward to listening to an Obama speech. But I also have heard Michelle Obama speak. And when I was back in the whole journalism world, traveled with her when she was doing a tour to talk about all of the things she was doing to help our children eat better. And on that tour, she gave speeches that would literally light your hair on fire. She is underrated as an incredible speaker who is profound. So I think I and everyone in this room is anticipating hearing from two of the great speakers and great articulators of Americanness that we have, and I think that's what I'm anticipating too. Just a little bit on the reporting side. Go ahead, go.
Well, I was going to double down on your point, and then of course, I'm eager to hear your reporting. I was just going to mention, you know, it's not a competition between the two of them. They play very different roles.
You're right.
But we do measure things in journalism. She did sell more, Michelle Obama did sell more books than former President Obama, and it's true.
Her book was shorter. First of all, Ari, his book was like that thick. People were like, I can't read that. They were like, her book was shorter, and it was like book profound, and women bought it.
It might not be apples to apples. But also, you think about the division that has become so normalized. I've heard people in the last 6 years of the Trump era and say, oh, well, the current president's numbers, well, they have to be low because we're so divided. Obviously, Trump's numbers, they never really cracked 45%. Michelle Obama's numbers, of course, being part of the Obama legacy, that's something they share, which is why I only sort of jest about competition. But her numbers are not only higher than his, they're higher than most public figures. And so we think about her and the role she played, and Kamala Harris, as Hillary Clinton alluded to last night, playing an untraditional role. As I like to say, and this is a throwback, don't believe the hype. When the negative pundits say, oh, it's always going to be this polarized, or, oh, a woman of color would only appeal to, quote unquote, this or that group, not necessarily. Let's let the people decide. And so I think that's also a note. But back to you and your reporting as well.
Well, no, she is the single most popular figure in the Democratic Party. It's why people have this fever dream that someday she's going to run for president. Let me just disabuse y'all of that. She is never running for president, y'all. Stop saying that. Stop putting her in polls and saying she's going to. No, she's not. No, I'm gonna leave aside the things that that I've been talking about because they're off this topic. So I want to bring in Alex Wagner because she is where she needs to be. She is literally right on the floor here at the DNC. We want to know what you're hearing, seeing, what's going on, my friend.
It's a challenging sound environment, but as your chief vibes correspondent, I'm here to tell you that the vibrations are very positive tonight. Maybe even more anticipatorily positive than they were last night, which was, as you know well, Joy, an enormously positive event for Joe Biden. I think that there's a lot of excitement for, two of the great figures in the Democratic Party. Not just because I think people are eager to see some of the Obama-era magic grafted onto the Harris-Walz campaign, but I think for a Democratic Party that in the Trump years sort of wondered whether Barack Obama was an aberration, whether he was an historic anomaly. The mere presence of Barack Obama at this convention handing the reins off to Kamala Harris is a suggestion that the aberration was Donald Trump. And that America, as Barack Obama liked to invoke, is the universe is the moral arc of the universe is long, but is bending towards a sort of justice, a more inclusive society. That Barack Obama and Kamala Harris are the true sort of political future for America, and that Donald Trump was merely one step backwards before the inevitable pendulum swing forward. So I think there's this sense of not just excitement for the immediate future of the Democratic Party, but about the long-term prospects of American society. And that's really, a terribly intoxicating 1-2 punch for people in the audience tonight. There's just an enormous amount of excitement on the floor. And I was talking to one of the delegates from Florida who was saying, you know what? Anything can happen. This is the state of Florida where Republican, registrants outnumber Democrats by 1 million. And look, if Florida's feeling optimistic, wow, that's all I got to say.
I know, as a former Floridian, we always take Florida optimism with a huge grain of salt and a giant orange. But we'll see what happens, and there's a reason to be optimistic. There's a lot there. I do want to follow up a little bit on your point, Alex, and ask you to say more. Because earlier, Nicole Wallace, our wonderful friend Nicole Wallace, was talking about the ways in which the Harris-Walz ticket has kind of shoved Donald Trump off of the stage. And I think about the Obamas in that same way, right? And, Barack Obama is the guy who embarrassed Donald Trump at a White House Correspondents' Dinner, so much so that Donald Trump vowed to become president. And his presidency is seen in so many ways as rejectionism against Obama. The anger and rage that this man had been a black president for 2 terms produced Donald Trump's presidency. What are you hearing and what are people saying about the idea that maybe Kamala Harris has sort of ended the Trump era, right? I mean, because there is that sort of sense that this era was a hot fire that can't continue to burn forever, and that maybe the antidote is Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, this gargantuan teamwork of the Democratic Party.
Well, I mean, I've heard some, people are very articulate in their enthusiasm, but they always end it with, we have work ahead. It's going to be a tight election. People understand that this, Kamala Harris hasn't run away with this by a long shot, right? So nobody's ready to write the epigraph for the Trump years. But I do think, it's a powerful suggestion, right? That Barack Obama is the future, that Kamala Harris is the future, and that Donald Trump is the past. And indeed, that demographic reality lies at the core of so much of Donald Trump's power over his audience, right? The idea that a multicultural, inclusive America is actually the road we're heading down, and that the sort of white patriarchal society that allowed Donald Trump to profiteer as much as he has is going into the rear view, right? That's a powerful, distressing idea if you are part of the white patriarchy like Donald Trump, and supporters who see change, who see people like Barack Obama, who see people like Kamala Harris, multi-ethnic, multiracial, progressive leaders, and are scared of that vision, right? The idea that this might be the norm, and that Trumpism and MAGAism are the things of yesterday rearing their heads for one last gasp, man, that's powerful stuff. And I think, you know, one of the great things about the way Kamala Harris and Barack Obama have handled this is they don't sort of allude to that reality with fear or with triumphalism, but they say we can all be part of the future no matter what the color of our skin is. And I think indeed tonight it's going to be that classic Obama. Yeah, I'm not sure that he's going to say there is no red America, there is no blue America, there's only the United States of America, but I think that idea that we're all in it together, that ism is going to be something we hear about, because Kamala Harris is a direct manifestation of that, and their friendship was forged over that reality.